Ruth Everly's morning began like any other, frantic. She darted around her small kitchen in the worn-out greenhouse she rented on Brooklyn Avenue, trying to toast waffles while pouring juice and packing two identical lunchboxes with peanut butter sandwiches, carrot sticks, and the occasional cookie. Her twin daughters, Ava and Zoe, both 4 years old with curly auburn hair and endless energy, sat cross-legged on the tiled floor, trying to dress their stuffed animals instead of themselves. Ruth glanced at the clock and muttered under her breath, "We're going to be late again." But today wasn't like the other days. The daycare she relied on had shut down with barely a week's notice. Licensing issues, they said, and her usual backup, Mrs. Tilda from across the street, was down with a fever. With no family nearby and no sitter available, Ruth faced a choice that made her chest tighten. She worked as a housekeeper for a strict, high-profile billionaire named Julian Stone, whose estate was known for its pristine order and zero tolerance for anything that disrupted it. Bringing children, let alone two, was unthinkable. Yet bills needed paying and rent was due. Ruth crouched down to her daughters. "Girls," she said softly, brushing their hair back, "you're coming to work with Mommy today. But you have to be really quiet. Like little mice, okay?" Ava nodded with big eyes. Zoe tilted her head. "Will there be snacks?" Ruth chuckled in spite of herself and kissed their foreheads. "Yes, baby. But only if no one finds out you're there." She knew she was taking a risk that could cost her everything, but what choice did she have? The drive to the estate felt longer than usual, even though the traffic was light. Ruth kept glancing at the rear-view mirror. Ava was humming a soft tune, while Zoe stared out the window, sucking on the sleeve of her sweater, something she did when she was nervous. Ruth reached a hand back to touch her knee. "It'll be okay, love," she whispered. Her own heart pounded in her chest like a drum. As the tall wrought iron gates of the Stone estate came into view, Ruth's palms turned clammy. The house beyond was more like a palace, white stone, endless windows, and silence that seemed to echo even outdoors. She parked by the service entrance and turned around. "Okay, here's the deal. We go inside, straight to the laundry room. No running. No yelling. No fun." Zoe interrupted. Ruth smirked, but the worry was still in her eyes. "No being seen. You can draw or play, but stay quiet." The twins nodded. Ruth had already packed a backpack with coloring books, snacks, and their favorite plush toys. She quickly zipped up their coats, pulled their hats low, and tucked them under her arms like precious cargo. Inside, the estate was even more intimidating. The staff barely looked at her, moving like silent ghosts, all dressed in matching navy uniforms. Ruth prayed no one noticed the extra footsteps behind hers as she led the girls down to the lower corridor. "This way," she whispered. The laundry room was small but warm, with humming machines and a closet full of supplies. "You'll stay in here," she said, setting up a cozy nest of towels for them. "And no opening the door unless it's me, understand?" Two little heads nodded solemnly. Ruth locked the door behind her with trembling hands. Upstairs, Ruth tried to act normal, even though her nerves were unraveling with every step. The grand hallway stretched on like a museum corridor, polished floors, golden light fixtures, expensive art pieces hanging in perfect symmetry. Mr. Stone hated noise, clutter, or disruption of any kind. He rarely spoke to Ruth directly, but when he did, it was with clipped sentences and a disapproving stare that made her knees weak. Today, he was hosting some high-profile guests for brunch, and everything had to be perfect. Ruth's job was to help set the table in the east dining room and polish the silver trays. As she worked, her hands shook slightly. "Hey," whispered Ingrid, a fellow housekeeper with kind eyes and a heavy accent. "You okay?" Ruth forced a smile.
"Fine.
"Just didn't sleep well." Ingrid narrowed her eyes. "You sure? You look pale." Ruth nodded again, not daring to speak further. She couldn't let anyone find out about Ava and Zoe being downstairs. If word got out, she'd be fired on the spot. The thought of losing her job, of not being able to pay rent or buy groceries, made her stomach twist. She tried to focus on the silverware, but every creak of the floor, every door that opened, made her heart skip. What if the girls got curious and wandered out? What if one of the staff went into the laundry room? Stay focused, she whispered to herself. Still, the fear hung over her like a storm cloud. Every second felt like a balancing act between responsibility and desperation. Just a few hours, she kept thinking. Just get through today. Back in the laundry room, Ava and Zoe were doing their best to be good. They had a coloring book spread open on a folded towel, crayons lined up neatly in a row. Ava was carefully coloring a unicorn pink, while Zoe was scribbling blue circles with great intensity. Is Mommy working with the Queen? Zoe asked suddenly. Ava paused.
No, silly.
She works with the rich man who has the big house and no smiles. Zoe giggled and held up her drawing. I made a picture of Mommy cleaning a castle. They both laughed, but then Ava's face grew serious. Do you think we'll get in trouble? Zoe shrugged. Only if we scream. Let's not scream then. They nodded in agreement. Despite their young age, they understood they weren't supposed to be there. They whispered as they played, pretending they were explorers hiding in a secret cave. They made a fort out of folded sheets and called it the Laundry Kingdom. Time passed slowly, but they stayed put, as promised. Occasionally, they heard footsteps above or voices echoing through the vent, but they didn't move. I want juice, Zoe whispered. Ava handed her a juice box from the backpack. They sat together, sipping and drawing, being as quiet as 4-year-old could manage. But eventually, boredom crept in, as did the natural curiosity of young minds. Zoe stood and tiptoed to the door. Don't open it, Ava warned. Just listening, Zoe replied, pressing her ear against the wood. On the other side, silence. But she felt the thrill of being somewhere she wasn't supposed to be. Meanwhile, Ruth was scrubbing a marble countertop in the upstairs hallway when she heard a voice behind her. You missed a spot. She turned sharply to see Mr. Julian Stone standing in his tailored gray suit, holding a tablet in one hand and eyeing the surface like a hawk. Yes, sir. I'll fix it right away, she said, bowing her head slightly. Julian was in his mid-40s, with silver-streaked black hair, sharp cheekbones, and a reputation for perfection. He looked at Ruth without recognition. She was one of many in his large staff. There's a brunch in 20 minutes. I expect everything spotless, he said. And keep noise levels down. I don't want guests disturbed. Of course, Ruth replied, forcing a calm she didn't feel. As he walked away, she exhaled. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She quickly pulled it out. A message from Ava. She had helped them memorize a few emoji codes. A red circle meant okay. A yellow star meant need help. A rocket meant bathroom. The message read, yellow star. Her stomach dropped.
Zoe needed something.
She looked around, made sure the coast was clear, then slipped down the back stairs. She reached the laundry room and knocked softly. It's Mommy, she whispered. The door opened just a crack, Zoe's wide eyes peeking out. I need to pee, she said seriously. Ruth glanced at her watch. No one should be near the back hallway. Okay, quick, she said, scooping Zoe into her arms. But she didn't notice the shadow watching from behind the corridor. The figure watching from the corridor was not a guest, nor a member of the main staff. It was Mason, one of Mr. Stone's junior assistants, a sharp-eyed man who never missed a detail and was known for quietly reporting infractions that others would overlook. Mason had been sent to check the rear hallway for a delivery delay and had caught a glimpse of Ruth as she disappeared into the laundry room. Curious, he waited, tucked into a corner like a shadow. When she emerged holding a small child, clearly not part of the household, his eyes narrowed. He didn't say a word, but pulled out his phone and snapped a silent photo, capturing Ruth mid-step. Then, slipping away like a ghost, he headed back upstairs with a sense of duty fueling his every step. Meanwhile, Ruth returned Zoe to the laundry room with a whispered, "Good job being quiet, baby," and a kiss to her forehead. She didn't know that her day had just taken a dangerous turn. Upstairs, brunch was beginning, and Ruth steeled herself for the final stretch, unaware that her secret was already unraveling. The brunch was lavish. The long oak table was set with fine china, gleaming cutlery, and a centerpiece of rare white peonies. Mr. Stone stood at the head of the table, charming his guests with polite smiles and perfectly curated stories. Ruth moved quietly along the side, refilling glasses and clearing plates as needed. Ingrid leaned in once to whisper, "You look pale again. Are you sure you're okay?" Ruth forced a nod, her throat too tight to reply. Every minute away from the twins felt like a rope pulling tighter around her. Just then, Mason entered the room and made a beeline toward Mr. Stone. He leaned down, whispering something into the billionaire's ear. Mr. Stone's expression did not change. He merely nodded once. But Ruth saw it. That twitch in his jaw. The way his fingers tightened ever so slightly around the wine glass. She knew something had shifted. When the brunch ended, Mr. Stone rose from his chair and looked directly at her. "Ruth," he said, his voice calm but cold. "I'd like a word."
Now.
Her breath caught in her chest. Her legs felt numb. She followed him out of the dining room, her heart sinking with every step.
She didn't have to ask.
She knew she'd been found out. In Mr. Stone's private study, the walls were lined with books and abstract art pieces that looked expensive, but unread. The billionaire stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Close the door," he said. Ruth obeyed. The silence that followed felt like a punishment in itself. Finally, he turned to her. "I understand you brought unauthorized individuals onto my property today." Ruth's mouth went dry. She didn't deny it. "Yes, sir," she whispered. "They're my daughters. The daycare closed last minute. My neighbor is sick. I had no choice." "You had every choice," he said firmly. "You could have taken the day off. You could have called in." Ruth clenched her fists. "I can't afford to lose a day's pay. I can't afford to lose this job." Mr. Stone studied her, face unreadable. "So, you decided to smuggle 2 children into a working estate that hosts international guests and high-security clients? Do you understand the liability? The breach of trust?" "I do," she said, tears welling up. I was desperate." There was a long pause. Mr. Stone sighed and looked away, as if weighing something internal. "Where are they now?" he asked. "In the laundry room. They've been quiet. They haven't bothered anyone."
"Get them," he said.
"And bring them here. Now." Ruth's heart dropped. She turned quickly and hurried downstairs, fear clawing at her ribs. She didn't know if she'd be walking back up with her daughters or walking out for the last time. When Ruth opened the laundry room door, the twins looked up with wide, worried eyes. "Did we do something wrong?" Ava asked, voice barely above a whisper. Ruth crouched and hugged them both tightly.
"No, sweethearts."
"But we have to go upstairs now, okay?" Zoe clutched her drawing. "Are we in trouble?" "I don't know, baby," Ruth said honestly. "But I'll be with you." She held each of their hands and walked the long hallway back toward the study, her footsteps slow and heavy. Mr. Stone stood when they entered, and his eyes immediately went to the girls. Ava hid behind her mother. Zoe sucked on her sweater again.
Ruth bent down.
"Say hello to Mr. Stone," she whispered. "Hello," they both said softly. Mr. Stone looked at them with an expression Ruth couldn't read, neither soft nor hard. "How old are you?" he asked. 4, Zoe replied. "I'm 4 and Ava's 4 too." "We're twins," Ava added proudly. "I see," he said, nodding. He walked around the desk and knelt slowly, so he was eye level with them. "Do you like drawing?" he asked. Ava handed him her paper, without hesitation. It was a picture of a house with flowers. "That's our home," she said. "And Mommy's cleaning." Mr. Stone looked at the picture for a long time. Then he looked up at Ruth. "You can take them home for the day," he said, "and come back tomorrow." Ruth blinked, confused. I still have the job."
"One warning," he said.
"Only one. Don't ever lie to me again." Ruth's knees buckled as tears filled her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. By the time they left the estate that afternoon, the sun had dipped behind a row of trees, painting the sky in pale orange. Ruth held both of her daughters' hands tightly as they walked to the car. Ava skipped a little, her earlier fear forgotten. Zoe held her drawing like it was treasure. Inside the car, Ruth buckled them in and sat behind the wheel, resting her forehead against it. Relief crashed over her in waves. Her secret had been discovered, her job had nearly vanished, and yet somehow, by some miracle, she was still employed. She didn't understand it. Mr. Stone wasn't known for grace. He was strict, efficient, business-minded. And yet today, he'd shown something close to mercy. As she drove, she looked at the girls in the rear-view mirror. "You were both very brave today," she said. Ava smiled sleepily. "Are we going to work again tomorrow?"
Zoe asked.
Ruth chuckled. "No, not if I can help it." She would figure something else out. Anything. But tonight, they would go home and eat dinner together, and she would read them their favorite book until they fell asleep in her arms. And for the first time in a long while, she would feel like they were going to be okay. At home, Ruth reheated some leftover rice and beans, slicing fruit into tiny pieces while the girls played with dolls in the living room. The weight on her shoulders felt a little lighter. She hadn't realized how much fear she had been carrying. Every day, every decision tied to survival. After dinner, they all piled into the small bed in Ruth's room. The girls snuggled under her arms. "Tell us a story," Ava mumbled, eyes fluttering. Ruth smiled and began to make one up, about two brave princesses who went on a secret mission into a castle guarded by a grumpy dragon. "Was the dragon mean?"
Zoe asked.
"At first," Ruth said, brushing hair from her forehead. "But the princesses made him laugh. And then he let them stay." The girls giggled, sleep pulling them deeper into warmth. Ruth held them close and kissed their heads. She thought of Mr. Stone and how something had shifted in his eyes when he saw the drawing. Maybe he wasn't a dragon after all. Or maybe, like in the story, he just needed someone to remind him how to be human. The next morning, Ruth arrived early at the estate, alone this time. She was prepared for awkward glances or stiff silence, but to her surprise, things were calm. Ingrid gave her a warm smile and handed her a cup of coffee. "Boss didn't fire you," she whispered. "That's something." Ruth nodded, grateful. Mason passed her in the hallway and gave her a glance that held no apology, but no malice either. Maybe he felt justified. Maybe he didn't care. Either way, Ruth didn't hold it against him. She had bent the rules, broken them even. She returned to her usual tasks with renewed focus, determined not to give anyone a reason to question her again. Later in the day, she passed Mr. Stone in the hallway. He paused briefly, nodded once, then continued walking. That simple gesture meant more than he probably knew. For Ruth, it was a second chance. And this time, she wouldn't waste it. Over the next few weeks, something subtle changed. Mr. Stone began to acknowledge Ruth more. Not warmly, not casually, but consistently. He asked for her input on how to improve housekeeping schedules. He noticed when she reorganized the linen storage. And once, when a high-profile client complimented the estate's pristine appearance, he actually mentioned her name. Ruth didn't need praise, but she couldn't deny that it felt good to be seen. One rainy afternoon, she found a small envelope in her locker. Inside was a handwritten note, for emergencies. Alongside it was a check with 2 weeks' worth of pay. No name, no instructions, but she knew who it was from. She folded the note carefully and placed it in her coat pocket. Just in case. The twins eventually returned to a new daycare center across town. It wasn't cheap, but it was clean and kind, and Ruth budgeted every penny to make it work. Every morning she dropped them off. She whispered, "Be good. Be brave." And every afternoon, they ran into her arms with stories to tell. Life wasn't perfect. Rent was still high. Groceries still stretched thin. But there was dignity now in the rhythm of her days. There was stability in knowing that tomorrow, she had somewhere to go, something to do, and someone who had seen her struggle and let her stay. And so Ruth kept going, not because life had gotten easier, but because she had learned to walk through the storm without letting it drown her. She had faced the worst day of her working life and survived it with her dignity intact and her children beside her. Sometimes, late at night, she would take out Ava's crumpled drawing of the castle, still stained with juice and marked with crayon. It reminded her of the day everything could have gone wrong but didn't. She never framed it. She didn't need to. It lived in her heart, a quiet reminder that even in the strictest places, grace can grow. All it takes is one moment of being seen, and one person willing to believe there's more to a mother's desperate choice than a broken rule.